Hey everyone, and welcome to our third Weigh-In Wednesday for today. And the topic of the day today is alcohol. So as we're shifting into warmer weather, lake time, patio time, Minnesota summertime, drinking does become synonymous with that time of the year. So we wanted to kind of chat through some things about, like, is alcohol bad? How much should you have? What to do when you've drunk too much the night before? So when we think about alcohol, drinking in and of itself is not inherently bad, but there are some areas that can become a little bit gray. So when we're talking about how much, either in one night or per week, what are some amounts that you normally say to your clients, Alex, for both males and females?
Yeah, good question. I mean, that gray area you mentioned does get a little wider sometimes when we're looking at those people that whether they're active, depending on their normal metabolism, how tall, how much, like how heavy they actually are, what's some of their health history, or even family history. But in general, I say across the board, looking at that, if people are trying to maintain weight or even lose some weight, we're looking at like 3 drinks a week for men or women, excuse me, and like 4 to 5 for men is a good place to sit. Now, let's say you're thinking, I only have 1 a week and I'm trying to lose weight. We're not trying to tell you to drink up to that limit, right? We're not going to add that. So we also have to take some of your patterning into consideration. But that's that's a healthy state to be in, is about 3 drinks a week for women and about 5 drinks a week for men.
Mm-hmm.
What do you usually bring up when it comes to your clients and alcohol?
Yeah, no, I would say the same thing. And again, it really depends on the goal, especially if somebody's in a state where they're wanting to lose body fat, or let's say they have some, pre-existing health conditions too.
Yeah.
Like, what is the state of their toxic load already? Because
Right.
we metabolize all of that alcohol in our liver. So if we do have a lot of things that we're already trying to deal with, whether or not we've got gut dysbiosis that's already overwhelming our liver, or we use a lot of toxic chemicals on our skin or hair, or we work in environments where we're constantly exposed to that, the impact of alcohol could almost push you over the edge a little bit more quickly. But there are those people that, can metabolize alcohol really easily, and they aren't as impacted by it. So in this scenario, it's almost like an N=1 type of situation. But as a standard for most people, that's what I would say is like that 3 and 5 drink range is really where you're going to see, not as horrible of impacts on the metabolism, sleep, hormones, and all of that.
Isn't it so interesting? Maybe the people listening, or I know we've talked about this, but it's so interesting how alcohol is usually the last thing that people are willing to admit to us, which we feel like it shouldn't have to be that a topic that you don't want to bring up, but it's usually like, okay, here's my food, here's what I'm doing every day, and then a couple of weeks later we're meeting and like, oh yeah, by the way, I have 2 shots of whiskey every night, or got that glass of wine, and we're like, oh, that does play an effect, because there's a piece of metabolism when it comes to the caloric load. There's the actual calories in alcohol, and it's so interesting how alcohol kind of acts like its own animal when it comes to metabolism. How do we treat it like a carb? Do we treat it like fat? Do we treat it like, it's not protein, so we know for sure it's not protein, but it actually doesn't act just like a carb either. That was our easy way of defining it, was kind of like a carb. But we know for sure that when you're adding alcohol, you're adjusting your metabolism, because your body has to give that alcohol clearance priority. Like your liver has to jump on that alcohol because we're designed to clear it. You're designed to detox it. And so that's first priority. So let's say you have a day of drinking all day, and then you're eating chips and cheese and just having like crackers and a lot of like snacks all day, and you're eating all day and drinking all day. That whole day you're going to be metabolizing and detoxing alcohol and not using those extra carbs, fats, proteins. So that's an interesting part about metabolism, is how much priority it does take. Alcohol really does take a heavy chunk of what your body's priority is going to do.
Right, and it's not always just the amount of calories in alcohol.
Right.
Are there carbs in alcohol? Yes. Is there sugar in alcohol? Yes. But it's not just the caloric load from that. It could also be in relation to, okay, what are you eating in combination with alcohol?
Right, with lowered inhibitions.
Right. So when we think about like the patterning of how to space out alcohol, is it better to have one drink each night? Or is it to say like, you know what, I'm going to have, you know, my 3 or 4 on a Friday or Saturday night? What's better?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'd love to hear some of your 2 cents too. Um, but the more we read and more we understand humans, I guess, is that we really need some recovery time. And so I think the old recommendations, maybe they're still being used a lot, even from doctors, is like a drink a day for women, maybe 2 drinks for men, and you're pretty safe for just the overall amount. But what's interesting just about your liver health, and your liver does affect fat metabolism, it does affect belly fat, it affects all those areas that we usually don't want to be adding fat. Your liver needs some recovery time. We need our liver cells to regenerate and get back to clearing out other environmental toxins like you mentioned. So I really like seeing time and full days, full 48, 72 hours of our bodies and my clients' bodies to really have time away from alcohol. So I wouldn't say I want you to go on a bender each weekend and then really adjust that next day and how you're eating, and all of a sudden you're like really throwing everything out, the baby out with the bathwater. But I do find some benefit if you've got like 3 or 4 days at least, like fully alcohol free in that week.
Right. It's kind of almost like that intermittent fasting type of situation. Like
Yeah,
you're giving
yeah,
your system time to really take a break, to process.
right.
Our systems do need that. So outside of even just like time frame in between alcohol, like what are and we I have some ideas too, but I'm curious to hear like what are some of your go-to cocktails that you like, or amounts that you normally have. Like let's chat through some of like the more like, hey, you should have this, or hey, maybe like a never
Yeah,
scenario type of thing.
yeah. Well, most people probably already know, or they're walking through just scenarios of trying to remove the higher sugar drinks, like having a lot of store-bought margaritas or the daiquiris or the really sugar-laden cocktails. Usually those are the ones we're trying to pull back on first, which is sometimes a no-brainer for a lot of our listeners. But if you're looking for lower sugar, that's the first goal. You know, a nice dry wine. So a nice dry Chardonnay might work for a white wine. If you know you can tolerate sulfites and sulfates and all the tannins in red wine, you don't get headaches from red wine, that can still be a good option. But you want to go much more on the drier side. So you're looking at your cabs versus the Pinot Noirs. So being careful about, like some people think if it's a really dark wine, it must be really calorically dense and heavy, but actually they're usually a little bit lighter in sugar. So
Right.
some of those light, bright red wines are more sugar.
And then you're also getting more antioxidants too from that too.
Totally, yeah, yeah. But then the other side of it is like if you're drinking anything a little bit harder, it's amazing the amount of like seltzer waters, like hard alcoholic seltzers that are out there now. I mean, it started with what Truly and
White
I,
Claw.
White Claw. Yeah, it started with those, and every time we go to the liquor store, there's another brand I've never heard of. So it's like a booming industry with just hard seltzers. So that may be something that's great for you. However, watch your behavior, because if those go down, like you have no idea that you're consuming alcohol because they actually taste like a normal LaCroix or bubbly water would if you don't notice the alcohol. Be careful, because then all of a sudden you're a few deep and you're realizing, whoa, this is way more than I wanted, and now my liver's way underburdened there, and now we've got to add more carbs and fats and sugars, and all of a sudden we're stuck.
Right.
So I prefer you make your own with like a vodka and seltzer, and that's usually my choice. I like to have a flavored soda water with a little bit of vodka, and then the lemons or limes are always key. A little bit of acid and an antioxidant with your vodka or gin is really helpful. It's helpful for your liver that way. So it's not just to be pretty and have antioxidants and a little flavor. It's actually really helpful for clearance in your liver.
I do that too, where I like sometimes I'll even use like a Zevia like this for that ginger flavor, and then I'll put vodka in there, some lime, and then even some ginger juice. So you still get that like almost like spicy flavor from the ginger.
Right.
I like to make my own cocktail that way too, because then you don't have a heavy pour with the vodka or whatever. You can kind of control that a little bit more too.
Yeah, yeah.
Same thing with a wine. You could always mix that, maybe even with some seltzer water too, to if you're more of a volume person, like, hey, I want a lot, but you know, you can kind of like distill it down. I think for me, I'm definitely, I wish I was more of like a really slow slipper, but you can ask Alex with my coffee. I'm more of a so I need things that are gonna, you know, last me a little bit. So that's why I do just increase things with volume. But so really our main message here with alcohol is more to the fact that we do think that alcohol has its place, especially in terms of special celebrations and all that, or even relaxing from the day. But your behaviors around it and how much you can consume really depends on your goals and your individual metabolism. So there's a little bit of gray area there, but we certainly think that there is a time and a place for having it.
Yeah, and check back in show notes or even the email, and we'll make sure we get a few recipes in there, and just also a few tips and tricks on how to get back on track after you've had some drinks. So there's more to come there because your blood sugar is going to be out of balance when you're drinking. So the next day, it's fat, fiber, protein. That's pretty key because you're going to crave sugar because your blood sugar is low after a night of drinking. So look for more information that we can just get in written form for you, but take a peek at that email and we'll give you some more info on how to safely consume alcohol and still enjoy some socialization. But thanks, Hannah. Appreciate your input.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us today, guys.